One of the big issues that we have heard today and we've talked about lately is that without surgery, the risk of suicide goes way up. Well, I am one of those parents who lived with a daughter who was suicidal for 3 years. Someone once asked me, wouldn't I just do anything to help save her? And I really had to think. And the answer was no.
So this clip shows exactly how much transphobia has fundamentally rotted away people's brains.
I was not going to give in to her emotional manipulation because she was incapable of making those decisions, and I had to make those decisions for her. I was not going to let her tear apart my family, and I was not going to let her tear apart me because I had to be strong for her. I had to have a vision for her life when she had none, was incapable of having none. I was lost. I was scared. I spent hours on the floor in prayer because I didn't know that when I woke up, if my daughter was going to be alive or not. But I knew that I had to make those right decisions for her so that she would have a precious, successful adulthood at that time.
So this clip is literally unbelievable because it is a mother talking about her trans child and how much she doesn't support them, so much so to the point where she very knowingly suggested that she would rather not have a child than have a trans child. And it's just so shameless and frustrating because it touches on so many things that trans people have to deal with. First and foremost being the infantilization that trans people have to deal with. Because fundamentally, there's constantly this denial of like, oh, you don't really know who you are, you can't possibly know, even with adults. They say that, oh, you can't possibly know, you must be just swept up in some sort of trend, it's a social contagion, oh my goodness gracious. But the harsh reality is, if you're old enough to know that you're cisgender, then you're old enough to know that you're transgender. If a 13-year-old cisgender boy can know that he's a boy, then a 13-year-old transgender boy can know that he's a boy. Because fundamentally, all of the science and research in terms of psychological development shows that gender identity is a pretty stable thing during and after puberty. But it just goes to show this mindset that these conservatives have that children should just be property, that you should just live a life that's predetermined by your parents, and that children should have no agency whatsoever, be allowed to be their own person. And it also shows that what you would think would be the conditional love that somebody would get from a parent, a lot of queer folks know to fundamentally not be the case, because unfortunately there are a lot of people who would literally just disown their family members for being queer. In fact, something around 40% of homeless youth are homeless specifically because they were kicked out of their houses by their parents for being queer, which really just goes to show how much homophobia and transphobia has just rotted away people's brains, where quite literally it interferes with their ability to be like loving and caring parents. And then on top of that, you get her saying that, oh, you're tearing this family apart, when in reality, who's tearing the family apart? Are queer kids tearing the family apart by just being themselves? Or maybe perhaps is it the bigoted family members that are tearing the family apart? Because being queer doesn't do anything to anybody, doesn't hurt anybody. Being trans isn't something that's just gonna destabilize everything in the world. No, it's just another way to be and exist in the world. But what does damage a family, what does actually hurt family dynamics, is when you're so bigoted that you are unwilling to accept people for who they are, and you're willing to damage your relationships with people because you don't want them to be who they are. And so in so many layers, queer folks constantly have to deal with this infantilization, this constant denial of ourselves, and then the blame that we get for just existing as our own people. And when people are bigoted towards queer folks, especially trans people, somehow the blame always gets put on trans people. Why did you make me be so bigoted against you? And it just speaks to the shamelessness that exists across this country. Something that is revealed very, very clearly when you see people posting and saying transphobic thing. It shows how unbelievably entitled they are, how selfish they are, and how willing they are to throw their own children under the bus, or literally kick their own children out of their home. And the last thing I'll say is this notion that comes from the right wing here, where they try to say that basic statistics about suicide rates among queer folks, and specifically trans folks, when it comes to access to gender affirming care, they say that it's manipulative to cite those statistics. But think about it like this. Would it be manipulative for a doctor to tell you that if you have cancer and you don't get chemotherapy, that might increase your odds of dying of cancer, and that the appropriate treatment that the medical community has landed on to prevent dying of cancer is chemotherapy? Is that manipulative of the doctor to say that? Or are they just giving you the facts that you need to make an informed decision about your own health care? Because that is exactly what is happening here. Science has showed, medical research has showed very, very clearly that gender affirming care for the trans people that want it and need it is very, very beneficial to their mental health. It actually makes a huge difference. And so when people cite those figures, that's not them being manipulative. That is them just stating the basic facts that the medical community has come to. And more importantly, in my opinion, plenty of trans people have said very, very clearly. Because I know this is a wild concept, but maybe, hear me out, we should actually just listen to trans people when we say that, hey, hormones are pretty great, and I'm living my life pretty well on estrogen. It's doing a lot of really great things for me. Can we just accept that maybe, perhaps, trans people's experience matters, and that all of the joy we get from just existing as ourselves in the world is actually pretty neat and good? But no, of course, she rejects all of that as well, because clearly she must know better for her kid, and would rather torture their kid with an existence where their identity is not acknowledged, and where they're not allowed to really be themselves, than perhaps accept the fact that maybe their kid's life is going to pan out a little bit differently than what they thought.